for me, it was a great Monte Carlo rally. And, I said this on Twitter and got a massive response to it, particularly from Poland. But my man of the rally, I'd like to have given it to Loeb. And if he'd continued on and kept fighting, I would have given it to Loeb. And it's not taking anything away from what Loeb did. But to be honest, Loeb did in some ways what we expected him to do, which was to use every ounce of knowledge, experience, ability, and push Ogier all the way. The man of the rally for me, the man of the Monte, was Kubica. He was just blindingly fast. Stage 10, 2 minutes quicker than Sebastian Loeb. It was the most astonishing run through a stage that we've seen in a long, long time. And okay, he had some very, very big moments, and then an unfortunate moment at the end of the penultimate stage. What was that? Stage 14. But for me, it looks good for Kubica for the season. It really does. He needs just a little more luck. He needs a few more breaks. What he's shown is he's got the pace. Potentially those Pirellis have got the pace as well, Tony. So there was a lot of interesting stuff coming out of that rally, and I loved every second of it, I'd have to say.
I think I don't know whether this is going to be a help or a hindrance to him. Obviously, he's kind of gone now with... I don't think he's under the M Sport umbrella now, is he? He's kind of a standalone with M Sport assistance now. I don't know whether that's going to be a help or a hindrance to him throughout the season. Obviously, maybe...
No, well, I'll tell you what it will be. I was very fortunate. I had dinner with Mr. Kubica one evening, and it was fascinating. It was two of the most fascinating hours of my life. Would you believe I said about 4 words in 2 hours, which for me is some kind of record.
That's never happened, Colin. That's never happened.
It did. It genuinely happened, Tony, because I actually had met, at that point, a man who liked to talk more than I do, in Mr. Kubica. He likes to talk, and listening to him was absolutely fascinating, because we take for granted our World Rally Championship stars, and because they're all such nice people and they're all such approachable people in the World Rally Championship. But, these Formula One gods are all slightly aloof, aren't they? They're slightly unattainable, they're slightly unapproachable. But Kubica isn't that sort, and to sit down with him and listen to him talking for probably an hour and 20 minutes about Formula One was absolutely fascinating. But he reserved the last 3/4 of an hour for the World Rally Championship. And he was relatively critical and relatively scathing about the lack of standards. But listen, I was fortunate or unfortunate to work in Formula One for a little while. And they're worlds apart. I mean, the money that's spent in Formula One is massive. The professionalism in Formula One, that's not being detrimental to the level of professionalism in our sport, but the level of professionalism in Formula One is at a different level. And Kubica was kind of scathing, and in his year with Citroën, he was a bit grumpy. He wasn't really happy with the service he was getting. In his year with M Sport last year, a similar situation. So in my view, him going with his own team is the right thing, because he can control every factor. And he's quite clearly, to me, a bit of a control freak. He needs to feel he's in control. He needs to know about every element of every aspect that he's working with. And really the only way to do that is to have your own team. It brings with it lots of different challenges, lots of different responsibilities, lots more work. But he also seems to me to be a workaholic. He puts so much effort, so much work into the rallies. And, he has time, and he says that. He's got time between rallies. So he's clearly going to put that time into running his own team. It's a proper setup. They bought a factory, they bought 2 cars, they bought in engineers. They are properly going for it with this team, Tony. And I think it's the right move for him, because there'll be no one else to blame. It's all his responsibility now. So is that a bit much for a driver? Perhaps, but maybe not for a man of Kubica's abilities, of Kubica's setup. He's a very, very particular type of character, or what I've managed to find out about his character. And I think it'll suit him. I think he'll work well with it. Remember, as I mentioned earlier, they've gone with Pirellis this year. They looked great on the tarmac. They looked fabulous on the snow in January, so we can assume they'll be good on the snow in Sweden as well. I think it's the right move for Kubica, and I really hope that it pays dividends for him this year.
I must admit, the stages I'm just having a quick look now at. I was out on. You're probably going to have to help me with the pronunciations a little bit here, Cole. Which was SS5, which was Saint Julien.
Saint Julien, yeah, that's good.
I was out on that stage, and I must admit there was him, Kubica, Ogier, Loeb, and Elvin Evans were visually the fastest drivers through that section, and possibly Meek just on the edge of them. But they were visually quicker, and Kubica was the one that really, really stood out. And again, I was about 3Ks in on the end of the Turini, ironically just before where he went off, because he went off about a K past where I was. And that's why we managed to get that little video up on the Facebook page of Total Rally, if anybody's seen it. And because literally he was a kilometre away where he went off, and he was visually the fastest driver through the section where we were. And it was the kind of driving that there was no margin. Every time I seen him, there was no margin. If something was going to go wrong, it would go wrong, and there was no way you're going to catch it because it was going far too quickly.
But fair play to the guy. That's the way he wants to drive, you know. And the issue he's got, Tony, is that you know what it's like driving on tarmac. There is no margin. There's no margin for someone who's driving at 95% on tarmac. When things go wrong, they go wrong very, very quickly, and there's very little opportunity to recover them. Not like on gravel, where things go wrong and you have an opportunity to recover it. Kubica's problem as well is that he is limited in his recovery ability, his physical recovery ability. He is a disabled driver. He won't say that. But he is a disabled driver. He drives with one hand, and that's all well and good. And when you watch some of these onboards, you think, how is he controlling that car with one hand? That to me seems impossible. The really difficult part is when it goes wrong. When it goes wrong, at times he just doesn't have the physical capability to recover the car quick enough. And that's what really is going to be the big steep learning curve for him this year, is to know where he's in sections where if it goes wrong, he's had it. Other sections, well, this is a kind of a medium risk section. Other sections, this is a low risk section. That's where I can give it absolutely 100%. But, I love his attitude. He won 4 stages. He won one of them by a country mile. And his attitude was all or nothing. And you cannot fault the guy for that. He is just one of the most exciting drivers that we've seen in the championship for a long time. And I've heard a lot of nonsense written about that penultimate stage off. People having the temerity to suggest that he hadn't noted the corners after the flying finish. Well, absolute nonsense. A man of his experience, knowledge, ability, preparation, that would not have happened. What he's telling us, what did he tell you, Tony? The brakes went through the flying finish. Nothing to do with not noting corners. That to me is quite an offensive thing to say about the guy. But people make these things. People make these comments. People say he shouldn't be in the championship. People say he crashes too much. Well, he's a young guy. He's winning stages. He reminds me a lot of, if we go back 3 generations, Ari Vatanen. If we go back 2 generations, Colin McRae. He reminds me a lot of their sort of style of driving, which is finding the limits, and finding the limits at a cost. And the cost is some blooming spectacular accidents. But, Vatanen came good, McRae came good. There are other young drivers in recent times who have had a similar style. Chris Meek, you might argue, was a similarly flamboyant, exuberant, absolutely no fear attitude to rallying. And he's 30 years old now, Robert Kubica. It's a step forward, a massive step forward in pace this year from what we've seen before from him. He now just has to find some consistency. When he does, he'll win rallies. Absolutely guarantee it, Tony.
Well, do you know what? I'm with you on that. I'm completely and utterly with you. And I think people do forget. A good pal of mine, Jamie Edwards, who listens to the program, he always mentions the fact that effectively he is driving one-handed. But we've just had a message in from Mike Shaw, Oregon Wings, who I know you know well. Made a really, really good point, obviously, with regards to what we were saying about having his own team and stuff. Could it go, unfortunately, the route of Solberg and be a victim of his own self-over-analysis and the controlling of the whole team? Could that weigh heavy on her as it did with Petter, perhaps?
Well, the problem with Petter is it got progressively worse. Petter got consumed by it at Subaru, completely consumed by it when things started going wrong. As I see it, Kubica starts from that massively analytical position. It can't get any worse. That's his starting position, because he comes from a sport where, the minutiae were discussed, debated, and basically talked about, in terms of detail. So he comes from that background, and he's already completely immersed in it all. And I don't think that'll affect him, or certainly not adversely affect him going forward. Solberg's problem was it was a progressive decline into complete over-analysis, and it got worse. The longer it took for the results to come, the more the self-analysis became over-indulgent, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And at Subaru, it got to the point where he wasn't talking to anyone because people just couldn't get on with Petter, which was a real shame. It got a little better when he had his own team, but I don't see that problem being a similar problem for Kubica, because he starts from that position where he analyses absolutely everything to the nth degree.